been a long time since our last episode, and I'll tell you all about it after the title card. Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Short. I'm your host, Wesley Malott, and today we're going to take a look at the Canon 5D Mark IV. Now, this isn't so much a formal review as it is just my initial impressions after 4 days of heavy usage. Let's start with the pros, or as I like to call them, the goodies. The goodies. First off, this camera has a great image quality. It produces really sharp images with beautiful colors. Me personally, I've always liked the look of Canon's color science best out of all the DSLRs, and this did not disappoint. Canon's skin tones just always seemed much more natural looking to me, which I've just preferred more over the other popular DSLRs. The dual pixel autofocus on this camera is just freaking amazing. Freaking amazing. There were certain shots for this short film where we were running with the camera or we had some other funky setup going where we couldn't see the screen. So we just slapped the dual pixel autofocus on and it tracked the subjects perfectly. It was freaking amazing. Freaking amazing. The addition of C-Log was a great addition. With C-Log, you can get better detail in the highlights of your image where a lot of DSLRs tend to fall off. And it also gives you greater dynamic range for more flexibility while color grading in post. I didn't get a chance to thoroughly test this camera out up through the ISOs, but I can tell you that it performed much better than most DSLRs that I've worked with outside of the Sony a7S II. There were shots towards the end of the day where we had to bump the ISO up to 3200 or 6400 ISO, and there's very little noise. This is very impressive for a DSLR that is not named a Sony a7S. This camera has great battery life compared to other 4K DSLRs. For the most part, we only had to swap the batteries once or twice per day depending on how extensively we shot. Finally, we get 4K in a Canon DSLR, which leads us to our first big con. Finally, 4K in a Canon DSLR with a crop factor of 1.64. If you're shooting 1080p, the Mark IV uses the full frame of the sensor, but if you shoot 4K, it crops that image in 1.64 times. So if you're shooting on a 50mm lens, you're getting close to what an 85mm lens would produce on a full frame sensor. Being so used to the full frame sensor on the 5D Mark III, I'd throw on the 50mm, go in for a close-up, and realize I was tight! The crop factor was really annoying and hard to get used to, and I really didn't like this aspect of the 4K feature. Our next big con, the Motion Jpeg codec for 4K. Don't know why Canon chose this codec. Playback on a computer and editing was super choppy and just unbearable. We ended up having to transcode all of our 4K footage to ProRes just to be able to watch it, let alone edit it. And lastly, we encountered a weird issue with the card formatting. Now, we formatted the card internally, but because of the insanely large file sizes, 4 GB for 1 minute of shooting, after every minute passed by, it would create a new file due to the internal formatting to FAT32. Now, somewhere along the lines, it gave us an error where it popped up and said movie recording stopped automatically. This error message became frozen on the screen and we could not get it off. So we tried to reset the camera somehow. We turned the camera off and the camera just stayed on. The button was off, but everything else just stayed on. You couldn't get outside of that screen, it was just locked. So we had to take the battery out to reset the camera. This issue persisted until we formatted the card on a computer to exFAT, which gets rid of that 4 GB file limit. Now, I don't know if the card formatting is actually what caused this issue, but it was a huge pain, and made me really unhappy and really worried about the shoot that was coming up, but luckily the exFAT seemed to fix everything and we had no problems throughout the duration of the shoot. Now, my final thoughts. Would I recommend this camera? No, I don't think so. It's a good camera, it really is, but it's just too little too late by Canon at an insanely high price point. Get rid of that crop factor, get a better codec, drop your price point by about 600 bucks, and then we'll talk. With all that being said, I really do like the images produced out of this camera, and I can't wait for you guys to see our new short film. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Behind the Short. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below, and then tune in next week for more Behind the Short.